Goliath. The humans gave it to me long ago. You should know it before you die. I am Demona.
Hey everyone, Andrew here, and welcome to my podcast on the Demona Chronicles, where I just look back at what I think is one of the most awesome Disney villains the company ever created, as well as looking at Gargoyles and other kind of nerdy, geeky stuff that I loved as a kid. But since this is the first one, I think I want to tell people about why I love Demona so much. Because it's funny, as I interact with other Gargoyles fans on social media, you know, it's weird to me because so few of them, like, say Demona's my favorite character. Like, most people love Goliath, or they love the Beauty and the Beast element of Goliath and Elisa. A lot of fans love Brooklyn. I've even seen a few people who say they really love Hudson. And not a whole lot of Gargoyles fans love Demona. And I'm kind of shocked by that. Like, genuinely shocked, because to me as a kid, she was just obviously the best one. Like, so obviously the best. And I loved the whole Gargoyle series, but episodes where she's not in it, or it's not like Demona adjacent, like Thalog, Xanatos, the Hunters, just my enthusiasm level is a little bit less than it otherwise would be. So, hopefully, like you, I'm a Gargoyles fan. I want to see a reboot, but obviously my preference is Bob Iger came to me. I would say, look, you should do Demona, and here's why. And that's basically what I'm going to break down for you guys. I'll be doing episode reviews. I'll be sharing some of my own kind of writings and fan fictions. I'm going to be analyzing, the adjacent Gargoyles and human family of that universe, as well as kind of other cartoons with similar theories and kind of themes. So let me jump into why, if Disney does a Gargoyles reboot, it has to be about Demona. And I know a lot of you guys are probably thinking, no, it has to be Goliath and all the rest of the original clan. And I'm like, no, and let me just break down why I think it should be. Gargoyles was so innovative, and it was so cool for its time. Like, it really was, if not 10 years, 15 years, 20 years ahead of what it was. But at the same time, you have to think, when Gargoyles was created, like, our heroes never had conflict, right? Like, our protagonists never were evil or morally compromised at all. Another way to look at it is, in the 90s, there was no Breaking Bad. There was no, House of Cards. There was no Sopranos. Just one of these shows where the hero of the show is actually kind of has an evil streak. And I think if we're not careful, if Disney just did a reboot where Goliath is totally noble and kind and always does the right thing, I think fans who are kids will get bored, who are now adults will get bored. That's just my opinion. So let me just make my case as to why, if Disney did a Gargoyles reboot, Demona should be the main character. First of all, as a kid, I just thought she was the coolest. If you look at, like, her versus all the other Gargoyles, like, Demona always had, like, a cannon. Like, she always had, like, some big laser cannon ready to, like, blow stuff up. Or she had, like, the Grimorum, the famous spell book, or she always had, like, a spell or some sort of... She just had cool stuff and knew how to use cool stuff. Whereas Goliath was always fighting with his bare hands, which that shows, he's a tough guy. He's a man's man. But I just thought that was just really cool that Demona knew the era and used the weapons of the era. And even all of the Gargoyles, with the exception of Lexington, who's the one that was the small one that was technologically inclined, they very rarely used weapons. They all fought with their bare hands. Now, Hudson had a sword, but yeah, I just think it's cool to kind of make weapons and have spells. That's just my bias.
If you are not my ally, then you are my enemy.
But what I also think is, if you watched Gargoyles as a kid, it was very enchanting, right? We didn't have a lot of heroes that flew around. I'm sure someone's going to be yelling 80s cartoons at me, but we didn't have a lot of cartoons where they soared in the heavens, so to speak. Not to mention, Gargoyles dealt with some really tough topics like bigotry, racism, interracial dating. It had dramatic elements that were not common to a kid's cartoon. In fact, even as a kid, my mom enjoyed Gargoyles, and she hates cartoons. She thinks most kind of Disney and Marvel movies are quote-unquote intellectual tripe. But she would watch Gargoyles with me. So it definitely had those adult themes. But why I think if Disney just remade Gargoyles, it might not hold the same magic, because if you were, let's say, 10 years old in 1995, a lot of these themes were new to you. Well, they're not new to you again in 2018, 2019, right? Not to mention the whole notion of flawed protagonists. Yeah, I'm a writer, if you can't tell. The whole notion of flawed protagonists hadn't been exposed to mainstream media. So if you think about it, look at whether it's The Sopranos, whether it's Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones, where your heroes are flawed and sometimes they're just downright evil. And so I think in a way, society has gotten more tolerant or more welcoming of a flawed hero or a darker hero. And I wonder if the totally noble, heroic, wonderful Goliath would just fall flat, in the future. The great thing about Demona, like I said, I'm a writer, and Demona is definitely one of my muses. One of the first things they teach you when you're kind of studying writing is, for TV writing, there has to be a lot of conflict. You have to have both external conflict, like AKA bad guys, society, or sometimes it's trying to get something done before a deadline. You have external conflict like that, but you also have to have internal conflict. Like the hero has to be torn, whether it's being a gangster in Sopranos or being completely ruthless like in House of Cards or Game of Thrones. The hero has to have some sort of internal turmoil, and I'm not sure Goliath or the other mainstream gargoyles have that. Something Greg Weisman said on a podcast, totally rocked my world. Because he basically said Gargoyles was just meant to be an edgier version of the Gummy Bears. And it's kind of scary, because when you go back and look at Gummy Bears, it's like, oh wow. Gummy Bears bouncing here and there and everywhere. There's an older wise one like Hudson. There's a younger rebellious one like Brooklyn. There's a heavier one that likes to eat like Broadway. They don't have a Goliath, but obviously it takes some of the magic away when you go and look at a basic cartoon geared at really young kids, and then you look at Gargoyles and you see all the similarities. Not to mention, Greg Weisman added that Goliath was the afterthought. He had pitched it a few times to Disney CEO Michael Eisner, and Eisner didn't see it, and it wasn't until they added kind of a big, strong, awesome, protagonist who kind of is able to kind of kick everyone's behind that he got some progress. And actually Eisner didn't really greenlight it till they introduced the romantic dynamic between Elisa and Goliath, because they pitched it as, it's a Beauty and the Beast cartoon. So, slight tangent. Moving back, the main gargoyles are just too kind of happy-go-lucky. Whereas Demona, she's the one that seems real to me, right? Because she deals with a lot of prejudice. The best villains are the ones that they have a kernel of truth in what they're doing. Demona knows humans as a trend are bigoted and prejudiced. And we kind of know that as viewers. So there's part of us that's somewhat sympathetic, because the main good gargoyles go out and save people at night. And then immediately after they're saved, the humans say, oh my God, you're a monster, get away from me. So we know on some level she's got a point when she's mad at humanity.
Have you no pride? No sense of justice? We saved their lives and they repay us with contempt.
The other thing is, when you look within herself, there's just so much tension there, right? So on some level, part of her loves Goliath. They're connected. They have a bond. On some level, she knows she hates humans, and yet she's always hanging around them. The cartoon never deals with that. It's a kid's cartoon. But as a writer, I've definitely spent probably more hours than I care to admit exploring, why does Demona hang out with so many humans when she hates them so much? Xanatos is her best friend, right?
This is Xanatos, my servant.
And before Xanatos, there was Macbeth. And she made a Faustian pact with Macbeth. So she's got bonds with human beings despite claiming she hates them, but she doesn't hate them as much as she thinks she does, or she's willing to use them or work with them. So that's a massive element of internal conflict. Not to mention what interests me about Demona is she was alive for 1,000 years, right? So from 994 to 1994, she was hanging out. And if Bob Iger came to me and said, well, what's your pitch? I would say, basically a Gargoyles prequel that explores what Demona was doing between 994 and 1994, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in chronological order. But if you think of all the cool stuff she could get up to in that 1,000-year period, I just think that's a really cool, awesome show. I know I'm biased, but I'm just kind of explaining to you why I think it would be an awesome show. Another reason why I think Disney might actually be more inclined to go with a Demona show as opposed to a mainstream Gargoyles show is Greg Weisman, the producer of Gargoyles, did say, the Marvel element kind of complicated his ability either to license Gargoyles away from Disney or create new comics or kind of work with that franchise. Because I think Disney, the executives were like, well, we have Marvel now. And I think from their perspective, Weisman didn't say this directly, but I could kind of infer that if you're a Disney executive and you've just paid billions for Marvel and then you've paid tens of billions for the X-Men, you're thinking, well, wait a minute, we've spent all this money. We have to reinvigorate these franchises. We have to kind of return on their investment. Yes, that's large corporations for you, but they got to do what they got to do. Marvel has loads of amazing superheroes. Everyone probably listening to this probably saw Avengers Infinity War. What Marvel, at least not before they bought X-Men, Disney Marvel didn't have a lot of amazing supervillains. If you think about it, the number one awesome supervillain is Magneto in the Marvel universe. And why is he awesome? Because we, like Demona, we know he's got a reason to hate humans. He was a Holocaust survivor. He's got a reason to be bitter. We can see that and we can kind of empathize with his anger against the prejudice he's experienced. What Marvel doesn't have is a lot of amazing supervillains. Now, again, they've got X-Men, but Demona is one of the greatest supervillains Disney's ever created. And I would actually put Demona up against her much more popular counterparts. It's weird because, again, only on social media, I never saw the parallels till other people pointed it out to me, were the kind of parallels between Demona and Maleficent. They're both strong, powerful women. They both are excellent magicians or witches or however you want to phrase that. But if you look, obviously, the Angelina Jolie tried to add some depth to Maleficent, but before that, she was very two-dimensional. She was, as many of the Disney villains were, she's mad because she didn't get invited to a party. Cinderella's stepmom was just hating on her pretty stepdaughter. The Wicked Queen was hating on Snow White because she was pretty. I mean, that's a very two-dimensional villain, and yet Demona is anything but two-dimensional. So, in conclusion, for the reasons I've mentioned, audiences have grown up. We're now used to flawed protagonists. Disney has a lot of amazing superheroes, but not a lot of amazing supervillains. Demona's got a rich backstory, a lot of conflict. I just think she's the best gargoyle, and if anyone asks my 2 cents, is Disney give her own show. But thanks for listening. This was just the introduction, explaining why I love Demona and why I'm doing a podcast about her. There's going to be more to come. Hopefully, I want to interview some fans. Ideally, I would love to interview some people who were involved with the creation of Gargoyles. So thanks for listening, and see you next time.